And hello, this is Keith Harden from Leading Edge Radio News, and today I have Tosh Plumlee on with me on the Skype hookup, and we want to thank our friends from Skype right now for their innovative use and their equipment and their software to be able to bring this to you. And this is another episode. I think this is our second or third episode with Tosh. I think it's our second one. And Tosh is a well-renowned ex-employee of, was it the CIA, Tosh? Is that who you work for?
Yeah, I was a contract employee for Central Intelligence Agency back during the Iran-Contra and then back during the Cuban 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Okay. And Tosh has been around a while, and he's got a story to tell, and we're here to allow him to tell this story. So sit back and listen, and you might want to take out a notepad and make some notes. Tosh, the microphone is yours, and I think we're going to talk about the dispute, the border situation that we have partially been responsible for creating. So go ahead, Tosh.
Okay, well, I'll try to do the best I can. We're winging it, and we're just gonna cover it as it comes. I'm down here in Las Cruces, New Mexico. We've just also had an influx of I'm not going to call them illegal aliens. I'm going to call them children and women and children coming up from Central America has now invaded, if you want to call it invasion, into Las Cruces, New Mexico, and being set up here in housings, warehouses, and it's quite an influx. It's quite a overload to the structure of this community down here, and it's happening, as we know, all over in California, New Mexico, and Texas.
Where are you located? Where are you at right now, Tosh? You're not at your home, are you?
No. I'm up here at a pretty secure place.
Okay.
So yeah, but I'm 40 miles north of El Paso, Texas. In New Mexico, and this is one of my homes down here, and I come down here quite a bit. The last couple of days, I've been sort of touring the border and talking to some of these people and talking to some of the medical people at some of the hospitals, and run across a very interesting story. And then I've taken my own background, going back and come up with conclusions that we're approaching this thing totally, totally wrong. The American people, in my opinion, are totally, totally wrong on this issue. And the reason I say that is that when I was a pilot for the CIA, I used to fly guns and ammunition to Central America countries. And in the return flights for interdiction programs, I used to fly cocaine back into this country for the purpose of interdiction, for the purpose of establishing the cocaine routes coming out of the cartels out of Central America. Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Mexico. And that was an operation known as AMSOG, American Military Special Operations Group, with a task force known as Task Force 7. That was an intelligence gathering network. So what we did in those years, and Iran-Contra was a perfect example, that we launched a program. I'm not going to go into all the details and take up all the time on this, but we launched a program that was in violation of the Bolton Amendment, supplying guns to the southern front of the Iran-Contra, fighting Nicaragua, Sandinista Nicaragua, and that area. A lot of people are familiar with that time span, 30-something years ago. At that point in time, our foreign policy was fighting communism during a Cold War. So we were pumping guns and ammunition down into Central American countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, um, even Ecuador, and Venezuela. And so we were actually destabilizing those countries through our political structure, our foreign policies at that time, under the disguise of fighting communism in a Cold War environment. So we were freedom fighters. We were doing a good thing. We were saving the Central America and Latin America countries from becoming communist. We were stopping the flow of communism into this country, into this northern hemisphere. So that was the mindset in those particular days. In order to carry those policies out, we had covert operations of supplying guns and ammunition to factions within those countries. Some of them good, some of them bad. Also, at the same time, we were giving millions and billions of dollars to these countries and their politicians. And in some cases, some of that money was being kicked back into this country to some of our corrupt politicians. So it's a tit for tat situation in those years. The people that really suffered, in my opinion, in those times were the citizens of Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. The people themselves suffered because the money that we were putting into those countries to stop communism wasn't being assimilated out to the populations. In other words, it was being pilfered off the war chests of corrupt politicians in Central and South America and Central America and these Latin American countries. To the 50s when we had death squads operating in El Salvador. So now, my opinion, we're suffering the fruits that we planted the seeds down there many years ago, and now it's coming back to haunt us in what we're seeing along the border here. It's not these children and the mothers and the fathers, and these aren't Mexicans. These are Central America people, Latin America. So they don't have anything to do except try to come to the land of the free, the home of the brave, and start a new life. And this has been going on for a number of years. This isn't just something that's been happening. The propaganda that we've always put out in these foreign countries is America loves you, America wants you, America is this, America is that. So from their viewpoint in those countries, and even when I was down in there flying C-130s in and out of there, we used to have young kids come up to us, and we'd give them candy, and we'd give them things, because even at that point, they were starving. Even then, the citizenry of that particular country, some of them, poverty, we have the same thing in this country, the homeless, they have homeless down there. And so there's not much hope. And the brutality that was imposed upon the citizenry of some of those countries, and El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and all those places, the atrocities that these kids and their families that were not associated with the political ramifications or the political situation that was ongoing down there, and our foreign policy to the big Americans going to go down there and stop communism and make these people free. Well, in reality, what we did, we raped their country, and we raped their resources, and we put corrupt politicians in power. And some of that money that we put through our treasury, taxpayer money, going into Central America was actually pilfered, as the record shows. This is not speculation. This is not theory. This is not was stolen, pilfered into politicians' pockets in Central and South America. So the point I'm trying to make is that we bankrupt that country. We stole resources from that country. We supplied arms and ammunition to that country. We created the problem. We escalated the problem. And then we financed and sent weapons, guns, and ammunition to both sides of the conflict that we started. The repercussions of that was the people, the citizens, the little kids, the mothers and fathers that couldn't find work. There was no work. This is not just something new. So the influx of these young people and old people coming through Mexico into the border here, being transported by coyotes that nowadays get $5,000-6,000 a head, has been ongoing for a lot of years.
For those of us who don't know, Tosh, would you explain what a coyote is? Besides a dog or a wild dog?
Okay, they use the term coyote. That's a person that for a fee will take you or your children or your family, and they will escort them through established routes through safe havens, usually by the cartel, the drug cartels, and then they will route them up through Guatemala, into Mexico, through trails, coyote trails as they call them, up through into the southern borders of the Baja, which would be California, Arizona, central route, and also into southern Texas, and in some cases by boats into Cuba, out of Cuba into the southern coast of Miami. So you have three staging areas, if you want to call that. You've got the Miami, the Florida area, you've got the central corridor of Texas area, and New Mexico and Arizona, and then you've got the western corridor, which is the Baja region, coming up into southern Mexico. So these coyote routes, these Mexicans usually, Mexican citizens, tied in with gangs and drug cartels, make a lucrative living being coyotes. They have a very sophisticated network set up where they know the movements of the Border Patrol, even down to the names and badge numbers of these guys, when they go on duty, when they go off duty, where they're located. And so they've been a border war in that respect going on for a lot of years. And so this isn't something new. The problem that we have now, there's a new twist to this whole thing. Now, do you have a question there? Am I going too fast?
No, that's well. The only question I had, you had said something about as you came back, there were drug routes or something that were being established. Why would we be establishing drug routes for illegal drugs to be either brought into or out of this country? I don't quite understand what the mindset was behind that.
Well, okay, we had a Fast and Furious situation, and that was a silly mindset. Okay, the routing coming in to this country with drugs, we have the most demand for their drugs down there from Central America, from Colombia, Medellin, on up through the south of the Latin America countries. These drug routes have been established for 50 years or so or more, and so our deal was at one point was to infiltrate those drug routes through an intelligence operation, a covert operation, infiltrate, in some cases go undercover, hire on, or actually get an aircraft, usually out of Miranda Air Park, and we would fly in or make the aircraft available to the drug lords in order to use their runways and their already established routes to come back into this country with contraband. How we would do that, we would say, okay, we can supply you with guns if you can supply us with cocaine. So we will fly the guns down to your staging areas if you'll let us use your runways and refueling depots. And then we'll bring these guns down here to you, and we'll sell them to you. And then we'll take the cocaine and we'll bring it back for distribution in this country. Now, that's an undercover operation. In reality, what that operation was allegedly at that point was an interdiction program. Now, the method behind all that was for the purpose of eventually infiltrating those operations and then shutting them down. That was a 1990s operation. 85, 86 was the Iran-Contra. Well, then that situation said, okay, wow, man, certain people can make a lot of money selling guns and drugs, and I'm talking about some of our politicians that approve through the direct commercial sales program as an example. Okay, we will sell these guns down there. We will use that money to purchase the cocaine back in this country for the purpose of interdicting it. So we're going to buy their cocaine so we can burn it up here in the United States. And while we're doing that, we're establishing these routes down there that will shut them down. Well, my intentions didn't quite work like that. There was too many on the take, too much money involved, and it became a situation: guns going south and drugs coming back north.
And why doesn't that surprise me?
Well, that's the way it works. So even the pilots and some of the crews that work these operations were beginning to ask, why is the DEA trying to bust us? Because we're in an infiltration program, an interdiction program that they don't know about because it's a covert CIA operation. We're funding an army. We're setting up secret armies in these foreign countries. We're bringing those guns down there. And then we're going to use the cutout that we're drug runners bringing it back, cocaine back, and other contraband. And nobody knows about it except CIA. So it's a covert operation. So then there's what's going to happen to the drugs? Well, eventually, in the first few months of those operations, those drugs went into interdiction bins. It was just a matter of time before those interdiction bins in Miami, in Central Corridor, and in the Baja region was pilfered, and it went out onto the street. So that's the lineage of the drug war. So then, back in Reagan's day, we start the great big drug war. Then we start the freedom fighters. Then we start supplying an army to overthrow another army. So the guns that are in the other army, Army A, which is the army of a particular country, and then the Army B, which is going to overthrow that country for the sake of stopping communism from coming into this hemisphere, then we end up supplying guns to both sides of the army, taking the cocaine under the disguise of an interdiction program, bringing it back to the United States. And then the people that was in those operations began to ask some very serious questions. How come no one's ever getting busted? How come these routes are not being shut down? That was the original program. How come these routes are not being shut down? So we began to find out. So because there was too much money involved, and it was going into campaign contributions. So the money that was coming back out of that operation was being pilfered off politically. So you have an undercover joint Pentagon operation that got into a political arm operation for the sole purpose of profit. So then companies were set up, and Dodge companies and front companies. And they, in turn, had the intelligence because they were part of the federal government. So then they could sidestep all the work that undercover ops were doing because they knew the procedure, methods and procedures, and they knew how to get around that. And they knew how to get into the evidence bins, and they knew how to get the cocaine on the street. So therefore, all they were doing basically was adding to their war chest for re-elections. So now that's some of the intel back in the old days that was gathered.
Uh-huh.
Well, that intel had to be classified, so it was. It was the pilots, some of them during Iran-Contra, that went and testified. All their testimony, including mine, what I just told you, was all classified, committee-sensitive, top secret through the Kerry report. I had made a series of reports to Senator Gary Hart, to his security advisor, which logged all these routes, the tonnage of cocaine coming back into this country. I myself certified that I was the pilot that had flown that myself, and there was 21 pilots involved. 16 of them were undercover pilots, working not for the DEA, but working for the CIA out of the Pentagon. And the CIA was acting logistical support for a military intelligence unit that was operating out of Central America. Now, I don't know if I'm trying to give the lineage here. So, you have a question on that, or am I going too fast?
No, you're not going too fast at all. I'm just sort of taking all this in. This is actually, sounds more like something you'd read in a novel or go to see in a movie somewhere that's imaginary and not real. I mean,
well,
it's amazing.
That's true, but what has happened over the years, that this information that I just told you has been out there before the fact. That's what makes it real. It's been testified and vetted by more than one source through committees and investigative committees of the federal government and state governments, Tri-State Drug Task Force out of Arizona testified to one of the committees about this. So in order to protect the operation and protect the money flow, anytime that the operation or the investigation into the operation started getting any kind of meat and making getting warrants to shut down and make raids, they were blocked. They were blocked, politically blocked. And then we got into a situation where we supplied guns to the southern front of the Iran-Contra in violation of the Bolton Amendment. So that was a secret operation at that time, and I think everybody knows Mr. Ollie North. He was brought in out of the Pentagon as Marine Corps colonel to come in and head up some of that operations down there for the southern front of the Iran-Contra. We had already been, quote, quote, at war in Nicaragua before Hassenfuss and Cooper and Buzz Sawyer, before Hassenfuss bailed out of the C-123 and before Buzz Sawyer and Bill Cooper got killed in the crash of the C-123. And in that was found notes and phone numbers of the Reagan administration officials. That opened up and led into Santa Elena, Costa Rica, which was a secret air base known as Point West. That was in violation of the Bolton Amendment. Guns and ammunition, again, going into an army that we set up out of Costa Rica, and for the purpose of destabilizing Nicaragua, interfering in government's plans under the disguise of stopping communism, when in reality all we were doing was profiting from gun sales and narcotics. Now, that's been established. That's not speculation. Mainstream media plays into this because when they had the opportunity to cover this as good investigative journalists, but at that point in time, the gatekeepers had already been infiltrated by CIA and DEA and other operations that did not want these operations exposed. So therefore, the Mockingbird operation, as it was known, was launched so that this information that I'm telling you would not hit in public domain. If it did hit in public domain, it was so disjointed and spread out there and taken off the wire, or the feeds as they called it, and that the average American citizen couldn't follow it. For instance, if a plane crashed with a load of cocaine, it was a drug-running aircraft. Well, if it got into the fact that that was a CIA-registered aircraft that came out of Miranda Air Park out of Tucson, or Davis-Monthan out of Tucson, then that part would be cut off the string or wire of the information, so therefore it would be like a stolen aircraft that was lost due to a couple of drug runners. Some of the pilots that were killed were actually CIA undercover operatives, but they took it in the shorts, if I can use that terminology, because they were classified as common drug runners. So therefore, whatever happened to them was perfectly all right. Now, with that background in mind, and by the way, this has been going on since the 50s when we supplied Castro with weapons in the early stages of his revolution. At the same time, according to the American treaty, though I think it was the OAS treaty, we were required by law to supply guns and ammunition to Batista. So here we are supplying covertly guns to Castro's revolution in the Sierra Madre Mountains. At the same time, we're sending tanks and airplanes to Batista. This was in the 50s. Then it led up, and then we had the Bay of Pigs, then we had the Kennedy assassination. So all this is a thread, a common thread. When you start pulling on the same thing that is happening today down here on this border, you start tugging at this thread a little bit, and you've got the hip bones connected to the thigh bone, and the thigh bones connected to the leg bone, and the leg bones connected to blah, blah, ankle bone. And you got all the things that Ezekiel in the Bible talked about. So, okay, it's them bones, they called it. So these bones have been buried, but now they're starting to come out. There's old operatives that are starting to talk about some of the operations that they were involved with that coincide and proves what I'm telling you today. So with that in mind, that's the reason I say, okay, we are now reaping the fruit that we sowed in Central and South America 40 years ago, because we have now destabilize that country, rape that country, bankrupt that country, put puppets in that country that do the bidding of our elected officials in this country. And American people are not supposed to know about it because It's just one of these covert, secret black ops that they're really protecting the American people and using communism, fighting communism as a ploy, as a disguise. So I don't want to ramble here, but did I make my point there about?
You're making, yes, sir, and you're not rambling. I think this is all good information. So keep it up.
Well, all right. So now let's come up current. Our background, which can be documented and vetted through many, many reliable sources, and also through the classified information that has been classified in order to protect. So one thing, declassify some of this stuff and let the American people know about it, because when they do know about it, the mass of the American citizens, then you will find out how we destabilize those countries. You will find out why the citizenry can't have jobs, why the citizenry has no money. The treasuries down there are robbed, and they're robbed of U.S. dollars and other foreign currency or other countries that have contributed. So it's not a question that some of these countries want to do things for their citizenry. No, they get involved in politics, and in most cases, those leaders of those countries are puppets set up by our own government to do the bidding that we request them to do. And that bidding is certainly not protecting their citizenship. So that common thread can be investigated of any investigative reporter, journalist, or whatever out there if they would do their job. But here's the problem. The gatekeepers in mainstream media, who have been put there in some cases by CIA and military intelligence, out of the Pentagon, but mostly out of politics, can't get past there. You can't get that information past the gatekeepers that are in mainstream media. In the 1960s, they had an operation, and that operation was called Mockingbird. And Mockingbird is today alive and well. And so the American citizen is not getting the true scoop of what's been going on in Central America and Latin America countries for the last 40 years. So because of what we have done for the purpose of profit and campaign contributions and setting our own people up through ambassadorships and so on like that to protect those operations in those foreign countries, American people are totally blind. And now we have a current situation that I'll get into if I got phase one of this interview under control.
Yeah, you've got phase one under control, I think, Tosh, and we are about we're just about halfway through. So we do also want to tell everybody that this is the Leading Edge Radio Network, and this is the Leading Edge Radio Network News Department. I'm Keith Harden, and we're talking with Tosh Plumlee about his experiences and some of the things that are going on with the border. Also, we want to thank our friends at Skype for the use of Skype to be able to bring this broadcast to you. Tosh, go ahead. The mic is yours.
Okay, so with that in mind, what I just told you about how we destabilized countries over the last 40 years in Central America, these people have no place to go. Some of them are orphans on the street. They've lost their mothers and fathers in these brush wars, FARC and all that. That's South America. We've been putting billions and billions of dollars into a drug war, which is a phony drug war, only to have this money kicked back into political campaign contributions in this country and other countries. So it's a profit thing that is being pretty well protected. Now let's jump to the Middle East. They have a plan. What I've just described, they see an opportunity. How can they get into this country? Where is our weaknesses? Our weaknesses in foreign policy in Central America. Our weakness is the border down here, which has been open, porous is a better word, for years. The Border Patrol has their hands full. In other words, they have to fight the politics rather than trying to protect the border. When you set up a fence down here that costs $1 million a mile, and it's only 3 foot high after it gets out of the little towns, and then anybody can step over it or put a bag of cocaine across, hand it over, and the Border Patrol is stretched so thin that that happens on a daily basis, has been for years and years. Up until about 2004, there was only a barbed wire fence that separated right here in New Mexico between Columbus and El Paso. It was only a barbed wire fence. Now it's a 3-foot high fence like the old tank barriers with the iron crosses with a iron rail running through it that you can just sit down on it and pull your feet and just jump over it. So that's our border. And by the way, that was a no bid contract that the contractors that got to put that million-mile border up or fence up, and that's another issue. So we have another country looking for probing. How can they attack us? Well, first thing they got to do, they got to get crews, they got to get their little army inside this country. So they probe, they find our weaknesses, and the best weakness they've got is the border between southern Texas, all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, all the way to past the Baja to the Pacific Ocean. So there's that whole border down there that's so porous that anybody can just walk across it, step across it, and they've been doing it ever since the cattle rustling days of the 1870s. So the border's been wide open. Used to didn't have much of a problem on that. But then when you start taking cocaines and how do you get weapons to foreign countries, then you start using a very porous border and you find the weaknesses. One thing that they've used for years down here is called a diversion. So they'll start an incident 20 miles away, draw the resources of the Border Patrol to that incident, and then they slip right on across the border. That's being used today, and that's being used right now, this day. So we have a situation that we're so focused on, which is actually a diversion, and we're drawing our resources down to one area. And then we've got, well, I'm going to use the word, we've had some Somalis that's been picked up crossing over this border that's been hired by Middle Eastern terrorist groups to infiltrate and set up safe houses, infiltrate across this southern border, and then quietly set up safe houses in major cities. And this is not just recently, this has been going on for years. These people in the Middle East have a plan. We have nothing. We don't even know what they're doing. We know, but when it happens, it becomes an intelligence failure. Our intelligence network has been screaming for years at various administrations, not only the Obama administration, but the Bush and all the way to Clinton, about, hey, man, we're wide open. We have infiltration. There is a program. We've got to stop it. We've got to do something. We know that Somalis are crossing over. We know that the Middle Eastern terrorist groups are crossing over. We know that they have a plan. We gather intelligence in the Middle East and find out, hey, wait a minute, suddenly they pick up in Mexico. What's going on? And then all of a sudden there's a big diversion. Now, they've been little diversions for the last few years. Any Border Patrol man that has worked his butt off down here on this border will tell you that, hey, when they draw our resources to one area, it's like, look over here, but you better be looking behind you because something's behind you over here. So that's what they put up with. And then they're thin. They're very thin and very dangerous. Now, used to, they didn't have to worry about the danger that they have to worry about now because there's people coming across this border that are just dying to kill an American. They hate us. Now, those people that hate us from over in the Middle East are now coming up through Central America and South America, getting in with the coyotes and getting led by paying the coyotes large sums of money to get them up to the border so that they can sneak them across with the illegals and so that they can get to their safe houses in into Las Vegas and Las Cruces and Atlanta, Georgia, and Chicago and get tied in and sit tight, just sit tight until they get their army infiltrated in this country.
Let me interrupt here. I want to ask a question. Make certain I understand this right. You're telling me that what we were originally doing by letting people from South America and Central America, Mexico come up here, now Middle East people are coming in through the same route and using safe houses and being these coyotes are bringing them up and into our country illegally. So while we're sitting here twiddling our thumbs and whistling while Rome burns, there's an army being built up inside this country that is built up of Middle East people. Is that correct?
That's right. Coming in from this country, Africa, and the Middle East, South Africa, and Middle East. So you've got terrorist groups. In other words, they have a plan, and we don't have a plan. We've never had a plan on this to protect this border down here. So our wrath is towards little children coming from a country that we destabilized, and then we take it out and get so mad and sitting down here showing off our anger, and our anger should be directed in another direction. In my opinion, it should not be directed at these mothers and fathers and these kids coming across this border.
So you're telling me that's the diversion, so that we stay looking at these women and kids that are coming over here, while the bad guys are coming in as well and sneaking in, and they're the ones that's actually getting away.
All right, and then this started a few years ago, and our intelligence has been screaming at this administration that this has been going on for years, and they won't listen. That for whatever reasons, they will not listen. So now, if we do have an attack, it's going to be known as an intelligence failure, when in reality, it's a political failure. Now, in other words, people get riled up. I don't want them coming into my country. I don't want this, and used to back in civil rights, I don't want one of them moving next door to me.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's the same kind of a situation. In other words, we've got thousands of little Ellis Islands down here along this border. We've got people that hate the Mexican. We got people that hate the black man. We got people that's demonstrated on this border, and now they hate little children because they have no place else to go. We're going to ship them back. Where the hell are you going to ship them back to? When they left, they were laying on the streets as orphans in some cases. They were dying. We don't report how many of them have died coming across this desert in June and July. We don't report that. Mexico is sitting quiet. You notice they don't get involved in this. They don't make any concessions because it's payoff. In other words, it is pathetic of what this administration is doing. They're more interested in fundraising than they are in solving the border problem. This problem can be solved down here. If you can define this problem in one simple sentence, you've got 90% of the solution to that problem. We cannot even get this administration to even recognize that there is a problem down here. Now, the only reason that they're starting to recognize that there's a problem is because of the demonstrations. But in my opinion, the demonstrations are focusing on the wrong thing. It is not. Okay, let me back up here and explain something. Our intelligence has gathered 3 years ago that there was propaganda being set up in Central America countries about how great the United States is. All you had to do is get a new life, just get a coyote, and he'll take you to the United States, and when you cross that border, you've got a new life. You're in the land of the free. Now, that's the propaganda that is being put out to the illiterates in Honduras. I'm just going to use one country, and it's spread through all of them. But let's just use Honduras. So the propaganda through word of mouth is, wow, if you want your child to have a new beginning, get your child to America. It's very easy to get across. It's very easy for them to get a new life. And then when they get a new life and get a new job in America, send that money back to your mother and your father if you had one, or send it to a relative so that they can eat, so that they can, because there are no jobs. And the political ramifications have filtered off the treasuries. And the money that comes for the United States to prop those treasuries up is filtered off by the politicians down there, with kickbacks coming back into illegal people in this country. So there's a cash cow going on. But now let me back up. The Middle Eastern terrorists, they see this. They say, aha, here is how we work it. We go down and we put propaganda, and we pay propaganda. And then we hire our own coyotes to make contact with these indigenous families. And then we give these coyotes the money. So the families don't gift the money. Some of them save their money. Some of them get their money that their children send back down there to them. But that's the old way of doing business. The new way of doing business is the terrorist has the funding to destabilize that country through propaganda, to make it think it's so easy to get into this country. And then all of a sudden they are approached by a coyote that's already received $6,000 or $8,000 from the cartel, from the drug cartel, who has already made inroads with the Middle Eastern terrorists. And so therefore they take the money and they say, okay, give us your children. Give us as many children as you can, because we will flood that border. And then we will use that as a diversion. We will divert them 50 miles away, and we will just trot right across with our Stinger missiles, with our RPGs, in pieces. And then we will assemble those pieces in our safe houses that's already been set up by the ones that have been in here for the last 5 years. So now, that's what intelligence has found. That's what intelligence has been hollering and hollering and hollering. But you can't get it past the gatekeepers in Washington, D.C., because they refuse to recognize, and almost to the point to where I honestly think, I myself, in my opinion, is beginning to think that this particular administration and our government has a alternative message. I'm beginning to think they're on the take on this damn thing. Others, it's a cash cow for them. Others, it's not protecting the American citizen. It's not protecting this country. That is now being demonstrated. It's not being said speculation. It's being demonstrated. They don't care. In other words, if an investigative reporter got on this story, which it, by the way, has been vetted, has been sourced more than, but it is blocked from getting into mainstream media by the gatekeepers in mainstream media. So we're at war. We have a war, and the enemy is us, our own elected officials in some cases. Number one, they have no idea, no concept of what the hell's really going on and has been going on. Like I say, they've had a plan. They've been working this plan for a long time. Now, anybody from Central America knows what I'm talking about, because they have seen the propaganda. They have seen the word of mouth going between indigenous families that love their children. In other words, do you know how hard it would be? I mean, let's turn it around. Let's say you had your 3, 4, 5-year-old child, and you want a better life because you can't see her hungry at night and starving to death and eaten up with mosquitoes and on the verge of all kinds of diseases, and you're looking for a better life, and someone comes along and says, hey, man, you don't have to pay me a dime. I'll take that child back, and I'll get them across that border, and I'll get them on top of the train of death, and we'll get them there, and then they can get a job, and they'll send you money back. Take my child. Otherwise, I do it because I love my child, and I want my child to have a new life. There you go. Then we get up here, and what do we got? Got 55,000, 175,000. Look at the statistical increase in the last 3 years of children under 10 years old that's been coming across that border, and they're not Mexicans. By the way, they're all from Central America. And that's what the American people don't understand. And now, for these radical people that have nothing to do except want to be seen and say that they're fighting for the flag and fighting for our freedoms, is the most ignorant thing that I've ever heard of. In other words, that, in my opinion, makes us the ugly American. In other words, they will not take the time to study what the real problems are. And then they go down here. I saw a kid just yesterday, a day before yesterday. One of the Border Patrol men tried to give this child a drink of water, and another man come up with a big flag on his back and slapped the water out of the hand and said, you don't give them effers any water. Send them home. Now, is that the American way? In my opinion, it isn't. These people are human beings, and we're not approaching this problem right at all by demonstrating the way that we are. Now, why is this president going to give now, instead of $2 billion, it is now $3.5 billion? Who's going to account for this money when it gets down there to those countries? How much of that percentage money is going to be kicked back into war chests for the upcoming election in this country? I mean, we're robbing our treasury. We're broke. We don't have any money, but yet we're giving it away. Now, what do we do? I mean, what's this money going to do? We're going to pay to fly these people back. What's going to happen to these little kids when they get off in an airport when no one down there cares and there's no one down there to care for them? We got a humanitarian crisis here. This is not a terrorist crisis. This is a humanitarian crisis. It doesn't matter, in my opinion, it does not matter what the politics of this is. We can't wait. We have to do something. There's people dying. There's kids dying. Kids, I mean, they're not just starving to death. There's heat exposure. This is dangerous of what they're doing. And the terrorists that are set this thing up, they don't care what happens to these people in the desert. All they know is that they can get enough of them into one particular place and they can get their program launched into this country. Now, bottom line, that's what's happening. This whole thing that we're focusing on and our mainstream media is covering for the sole purpose of entertainment and sensationalism, the whole thing that they're covering is not the problem. The problem is infiltration of terrorist groups that are using this for the sole purpose to get them and their weapons piecemeal and reassembled in safe houses in major cities of this country because they have a plan. And now, military intelligence and FBI and DEA intelligence get their things classified. They can't get out to the public of what their intelligence has found. What I just told you is what their intelligence has found. And they're getting so frustrated on this border that they know what's happening. And then local municipalities know what's happening. But they can't get the ear of any politician in Washington, D.C. because they're so focused on re-election and campaign contributions that they can't see the problem. And so we, therefore, have no solution. And we have no plan. And they are out fighting us. Anyway, I'm going to back off here. I'm getting a little too intense on this. All I'm trying to do...
No, you're not.
I'm trying to get people to listen and look at this from another thing. Robin Williams did a thing called the Poets Society, where you stand up on a box and you look around at things from a different perspective. If American people had ever done anything in their life, they better get up on a soapbox and look around and look at this problem from a different perspective, because we're at war, and the enemy from the Middle East has a plan. We have no plan. We have no countermeasures. We do not even know. Well, we do know, but we won't accept it. Now that brings up another issue. Why? Do we have an occupation in our own government that is part of this movement from the Middle East? I don't know. In other words, is this part of it? And I don't get into speculation in the world order and all this and blah, 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 and the Brandenburgs and, okay, maybe all that's true to some extent and pieces and that and so on like that. But that's not the issue. The issue right now is immediate. What are we going to do humanitarian? We had a program that we started in Nicaragua called HAP, Humanitarian Assistance Program. That started out sending Band-Aids and medical supplies to indigents that was in Central and South America. That quickly turned into a weapons deal, as the Iran-Contra proved. Humanitarian Assistance Program turned out to be guns going south and eventually migrated into drugs coming north to pay for the guns going south. Now, where did that money go? It certainly didn't go into the U.S. Treasury. It went into campaign contributions to cutout companies. Same program. It's the same but different, as they say in karate. Same but different. So history is repeating itself. And now we say, oh, it's terrorist. It used to be communist. We fight the communists. Now we're fighting the terrorists. America is constantly fighting some kind of brush war someplace, which we start, which we escalate, and which we furnish the weaponry to both sides of the very conflict that we started. Now that can be documented if anybody wants to go and prove it. It's all out there. It's disjointed, true. So a good investigative reporter can vet it and get the sources and bring it forward. But here's the problem you got. If you did do that, you're not going to get mainstream media on 6 o'clock news or CBS or NBC, ABC or whatever, or CNN or Fox to report it. Because if they do, they've got to put their spin on it. They got to twist it around, and they got to make it entertaining. So it's entertainment. Yeah, Talking heads is nothing more than reporting entertainment, because that's what the American people want. We don't want to hear what's really going on this border. We duck our heads. And then I've talked to people. I went around here the other day and asked people, oh, I don't want to talk about that. Them damn people up there in Washington, they don't know what, and everybody complains about what's not being done. And I've yet to hear anybody come forward with some kind of solution. We can't even get the commander in chief to go down there on that border and take a look for himself to see what the hell's going on. He already knows. There's a program. We have a program, and it's to undermine somebody from stopping the flow of cash going into these damn contributions that he's down there fundraising about. So until we stop the money flow and the cash cow that operates through the beltway of D.C., there's not going to be much hope for this country. In other words, we are being raped, we're being pillaged, we're being robbed. The American people are. And it's a disguise. The whole damn thing that we're going through on this border down here is nothing but a diversion in order for someone else to come in our back door and take us out. And any military op guy will tell you that. The Pentagon knows this. The intelligence unit, military and civilian, through ATF and other intelligence units and squads all over the country, they know what I'm talking about is true. But they cannot get it past this administration. And I have to ask why. So, and here's another thing. The reason I know I'm true is why all of a sudden I'm trying to be shut down. I haven't done anything wrong. All I'm doing is talking from my heart about what I know. I've had the privilege, if you want to call it that, of working these ops. The only reason I know how it comes together is because I've been involved since the 50s in one form or another, in and out, sometimes on the farm. Speaking of the farm, which is in Central Texas, and some people out there know what if it gets on the air, knows exactly what I just said. So the farm is a weaponry thing. So in Central Texas, and the governor knows about it. So how come nobody else knows about it? How come only the military people know about it? How come the direct commercial sales is short over $1.3 trillion in weapons that's unaccounted for, that the GAO can't find out about? How come the American people don't know about it from mainstream media? Why don't they go out there and check the direct commercial sales program and ask for an audit by the GAO and find out where $1.75 trillion in weapons has gone in the last 15 years? So, I mean, there's a starting point. So if they say, oh, Plumlee's full of crap, well, go look at it. Go pull the Blue Lantern report, who is supposed to monitor the direct commercial sales, and ask how many weapons have gone to Mexico from the United States into Mexico. And then how come we got a Marine sitting down there in jail for taking 3 weapons across when everybody down in this area has got a gun in their car? If they don't, because they got to protect themselves from the drug runners on this border area down here. I've got one right now, but if I happen to actually slip across the border just to go get a beer with a couple of friends of mine and forgot and left that weapon sitting down here in my car, I'd be sitting with that Marine.
Really?
So, yeah. So that's the way it is. Boy, you don't go across this border openly, and especially you don't declare that you got a weapon in your car if you're sitting in Mexico, because you're going to jail. Now, but at the same time, the very weapon that killed Brian Terry, Border Patrol Brian Terry, was shipped over from this country into Mexico. And that wasn't the only one. There was 3,300 of them that can't be accounted for from ATF. But these are the things you don't hear about in mainstream media. Why? So, a lot of questions to be asked. Now, the other question that I have to ask is, where in the hell is our elected senators and congressmen? Instead of playing politics with this, they should be asking the questions that I just raised. In other words, Benghazi. What happened in Benghazi? What happened to Fast and Furious? Does anybody care? What happened to Benghazi? What happened to the Stinger missiles? How come we're missing 400 Stinger missiles? How come 2 helicopters were shot down? They said it was an RPG, but yet the residue on the tail rotor assembly shows it was residue from a Stinger missile. How the hell did they get a Stinger missile in those early days? Now, when you see the ISA moving in, what have they got on their shoulders? RPGs and Stinger missiles. Where the hell did they come from? And then you just saw the president just here a couple of weeks ago, oh, we're going to ship 400 million more weapons to them. We couldn't even monitor and take care of the weapons that we sent over there 2 years ago. They're all now in the hands. Now, here's another thing I'll bring up. Military. Any military commander out there when his base is getting overrun, the first thing he does is destroy all the paperwork and burn it. And the second thing he does, he blows up all the ammunition dumps so that the enemy can't get the weapons. We certainly didn't do that in the Benghazi situation. We didn't do that with the annex before it got raided. We didn't do that when ISIS started marching on Baghdad. All they did is and when you look at them now, we funded their army. And I think it was intentional. That's my opinion. I think it was an intentional. I'll repeat that. I think it was an intentional. I think this thing has been set up. I think the only plan that we have is basically to fund the terrorists. Now, I hate to say that, but that's the way it looks. Because how come they made the march and picked up all the weaponry as they come through every one of those towns? Every one of them. What did they got? They got our Humvees. They got our Stinger missiles. They got our RPGs. They got all the weaponry. They got billions of rounds of ammunition, and they even got gas. So how come we left all that exposed like that? And then we turn around and we have, according to the Foreign Commercial Sales Programs, it states specifically that we are supposed to monitor and know where those weapons are at all times. We never did. We didn't monitor them. We didn't know, and then we just left them wide open. Now, the Benghazi thing, when the boys brought the weapons across around Benghazi, around the Horn of Tripoli, into Benghazi, the guys that brought those weapons around and stored them in the annex, they're all dead now. They were one of the guys that was on the helicopters. So how come the helicopters got blown up? And then the official report says, oh, well, it was blown up with a bomb inside the helicopter of the Chinook. But wait a minute. There was no bomb inside the helicopter. The intelligence report says it was shot down with a Stinger missile. But when the intelligence report got past Pentagon, somebody tampered with it. Was it someone in the State Department? Was it someone in Obama's administration? Suddenly changed the report, the field report, to say that it was a RPG that hit that plane or hit that helicopter? And then point two, how come the Marines themselves, the Delta Force, SEALs, how come they didn't want to fly in that helicopter? Because there was fuel all over the floor. There was hydraulic leaks, and even the two pilots, I think they're dead now, I think. But anyway, how come they had to sign gag orders? How come the survivors of these operations had to sign something and say they'd never talk about it or they'd go to Leavenworth? Why? How come they didn't want to fly in that helicopter? Why? Because they knew damn well they were going to. And how come all those guys that was on those raids, that some of them went all the way back to the guy that they killed, not Gaddafi, Bin Laden. How come those guys are dead? So there's a purge, a cleaning. Why? Who ordered it? Where did it come from? There's thousands and thousands of questions. And here on my Facebook page, I put 11 questions that I ask simply to ask the administration. 11 questions, simple yes or no. And to ask every politician, and over 900 letters were sent to our elected officials, and not one of those questions were answered. The only thing that the people that sent those questions to our elected officials got in return was a form letter asking for campaign contributions. Now, that's a fact. That's not just Plumlee sitting here talking. That happened. So these great investigative reporters are supposed to be working for some mainstream media. Go out there and vet what I just told you on this program. But they won't do that because they can't, because they'll lose their jobs or they'll get a bullet in the head or they commit suicide. So that's the program.
Great
so
working
anyway,
conditions.
Yeah.
You've got about 2 minutes, Tosh. So if you want to
Well,
go...
I've done rattled as much as I about can rattle, but I hope I made my point. This whole thing situation, in my opinion, is wrong. It's a diversion to get the operation from the Middle East into this country secretly, covertly, so that they can set and wait for an imminent attack on this country.
How many
three prongs.
How many people would you say they brought over here? The Middle East has brought over here illegally. How many people would you estimate they're sitting here in this?
Well, I know military intelligence estimates 200 to 300. 200 to 300 that are known.
Yeah,
and you can usually multiply that about 10. So, and then by the time you get the radicals on this side to join in with them, and we have that happening right now. I know we aren't running out of time, but putting one point, you got American kids to think it's very honorable to go overseas and tie in with one of these radical groups, and they're going to get their throats slit. They don't even know that. These kids that want to make a name for themselves instead of joining the U.S. Army, no, they'd rather go join with Al Qaeda because they don't like this country. I mean, America. I mean, we got problems, no doubt. I can see their mindset, but go to join the enemy is not the way to protect this country.
No, not at all, not at all. Well, I'll tell you what, Tosh. Let's hold on that, and we'll pick up on this next week and just sort of continue on if that's what you want to do. If that will be okay with you.
Well, as they say, if the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be with you.
That works for me. Okie dokie, Tosh. I'm not gonna disconnect you. I'm just gonna pot you down for a second. So just hold on, and I'll be right back with you. And this has been Keith Harden from Leading Edge Radio News, and we've been talking with Tosh Plumlee, who used to be a contract employee for the Central Intelligence Agency. And he was talking about all the things that happened along our borders and illegal people coming in, diversions. And I'm certain that the Leading Edge is going to play this more than one time.